Good evening. I'm Chris Hayes in New York, and there is breaking news tonight. The U.S. government has filed criminal charges against former National Security Agency contractor Edward Snowden. Snowden worked as a security analyst for the NSA and leaked a trove of classified documents about secret surveillance programs to reporters at The Guardian newspaper and The Washington Post. Tonight, the Post reports Snowden is charged with espionage, theft, and conversion of government property. For more details, we turn to NBC News justice correspondent Pete Williams with the latest on the story. Pete, what do you have for us?
Well, everybody's reporting this now because the government has actually released the charging document itself. The first page, it's a very bare bones thing. It shows only 3 counts. So this is the totality of what the government released, by the way. The rest of the case, if you try to go to the court's website and look at it, it says it's under seal. But he's basically charged with violating 3 federal laws. First, stealing government property, and then secondly, 2 charges under the espionage chapter in the federal charging book, improperly giving out classified national defense information to somebody who's not cleared to receive it, and then a separate charge for improperly giving out classified information about communications intelligence. So the 3 charges, each of them carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. So the other interesting thing about this, Chris, is that these charges were actually filed in court a week ago, June 14th, under seal, and we just learned about them today. Now, what this means is that the government has now started the process of seeking an arrest warrant in Hong Kong for the arrest of him. Obviously, the FBI can't go over there and arrest him any more than the Hong Kong authorities could send somebody over here to arrest someone on the streets of Washington or New York. So we file, the government, U.S. government files this provisional arrest warrant. The Hong Kong authorities then arrest him, and then the United States starts this process of extradition, asking the Chinese authorities to send him back, which he has said if that happens, he would resist.
NBC News justice correspondent Pete Williams, thank you for bringing us that. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
Joining me now is a reporter who broke this story tonight, Sari Horowitz, who covers the Justice Department for The Washington Post. Sari, can you pick up where Pete just left off on the Hong Kong extradition? When Snowden went to Hong Kong, there was tremendous spirited debate about whether that was a wise choice or not. What do we know about what is the next step in this process now that a formal criminal complaint has been filed by the U.S. government?
Now that a criminal complaint has been filed in the Eastern District of Virginia, the United States has 60 days to file a formal indictment. Is a higher bar with an indictment. They have to lay out probable cause. What the government of the United States wants is for Hong Kong to detain Mr. Snowden, to arrest him while they have the 60-day period to file a formal indictment. At that point, the United States will ask Hong Kong authorities to extradite Mr. Snowden. That could be a complicated process. We have a treaty with Hong Kong, as we do with about 120 other countries. And in that treaty, there is a clause that allows for an exception on political offenses. Now, one of the charges today is espionage. That could be a defense on the part of Mr. Snowden that is considered a political offense.
So here's my question for you. This is interesting to me, and I did not know this actually until you just said this. So the U.S. government clearly has been in contact with the government of Hong Kong, right? And you are saying that they have communicated to them, they want him, now that they've filed this complaint, they want him detained by Hong Kong authorities immediately.
Immediately. And it's interesting, the United States is really sending a message. I mean, they've moved quickly on this. It shows how serious they're taking what they consider a very significant national security breach, a national security leak. They are saying to Hong Kong authorities, we want Mr. Snowden picked up, detained, arrested, put in jail, and held until we file an indictment. And then they will move into the extradition process, which could get very complicated.
Okay, so let's say he is detained by the Hong Kong authorities. He is then indicted in the U.S. There's an extradition process, and he can obviously file an appeal against that extradition, right? One of the ways, presumably, he might be able to do that is to cite this as fundamentally a political charge by the United States, because he is being charged under a statute called the Espionage Act, passed in the Woodrow Wilson administration, right? How would that play out?
1917 Espionage Act. Well, now this case will go to the courts. Now, understand there are 2 tracks this could take: extradition and asylum. If it's extradition, it's fought in the courts, and presumably Mr. Snowden will have a legal team. There is this clause, this exception for political offenses. There's also a very rare exception in the Hong Kong Treaty. Experts say they haven't seen this in other treaties that would allow Hong Kong to say they want to keep Mr. Snowden in Hong Kong because it's in the best interest, defense interests, or foreign interests of the country. Now, it's very unclear what that exactly means. It's actually unclear the interpretation of political offenses.
Right.
So both of those will be fought in the court.
Sari Horowitz, who has a big scoop in the Washington Post. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, joining me now on the phone is Glenn Greenwald, columnist on civil liberties and U.S. national security issues for The Guardian newspaper. Glenn, of course, broke the Edward Snowden story in The Guardian, spent a lot of time with him in Hong Kong, interviewed him. Glenn, I guess I want to get first your reaction to the news today, which I don't think is surprising given what Edward Snowden has admitted to doing and also the way this administration has gone after leakers. What is your reaction to hearing the news?
Well, I think it's not surprising for the second reason, which is the Obama administration's record. I think it's very surprising to accuse somebody of espionage who hasn't worked for a foreign government, who didn't covertly pass information to an adversary enemy of the United States, who didn't sell any top-secret information, who simply went to newspapers, asked newspapers to very carefully vet the information to make sure that the only thing being published are things that inform his fellow citizens but doesn't harm national security. That is not espionage in any real sense of the word. This is a 1917 statute enacted under Woodrow Wilson to criminalize opposition to World War I. It has been used very, very sparingly throughout American history until the Obama administration, which has embraced it with an extreme vigor as a means of punishing and prosecuting whistleblowers. And so in that regard, I think it's unsurprising.
Well, we should just say that one of the complaints is theft of government property. The specific language in the complaint is theft of government property, unauthorized communication of national defense information, willful communication of classified communications intelligence information to an unauthorized person, and the section of the U.S. Code that last one comes in is from the 1917 Espionage Act, which I will editorialize is a pretty terrible piece of legislation. My question to you, though, Glenn, here is, doesn't the government have to do something? I mean, someone who worked for the government and inside the government skips out with 1,000 classified documents. This is a fairly big breach, even if you think, as I quite frankly do, the net benefit has been huge. It has precipitated a really needed debate. That just from a basic institutional sense, there has to be some recriminations or accountability or calling to account or some formal process through which someone who does something that so blatantly violates the basic norms of the institution, as what Edward Snowden himself has admitted doing.
So I would say two things about that, Chris. First of all, I don't think you'll find very many people who argue that he should not be charged with any sort of a criminal offense. I think when he did what he set out to do, that he understood that it was in violation of the law. He felt like it was a noble act, justified under basic theories of civil disobedience, and that he expected to be charged with a crime. I don't think anybody is objecting to that. I think the issue is that the extreme zealousness, the overcharging that the Obama administration has specialized in when it comes to whistleblowers is the issue. The fact that he's 29 years old and will be threatened with life in prison the way that Bradley Manning was, the way that prior NSA whistleblower Thomas Drake is, the extreme excess that really reflects this sort of vindictive mentality on the part of the administration with regard to anyone who brings transparency to them. And the other thing that I think is extremely disturbing is if this administration were equitable and consistent in trying to punish people who leak classified information, you could look at this act and say, well, I think it's excessive, but at least it's consistent. All sorts of high-level Obama administration officials have continuously leaked top-secret and classified information in order to benefit the administration, to politically glorify the Obama administration. None of them has been charged or indicted. And so what you have here is a misuse, a manipulation of these laws, not to protect classified information, but to punish people who leak in a way that embarrasses high-level political officials. And that's what I think makes it so pernicious.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point, although I should also note the Stuxnet leaks, which is, of course, the offensive cyber warfare operation the U.S. conducted against Iran. That was written up in the New York Times and quoted what appears to be senior administration officials talking about classified. There is a Department of Justice investigation on that. So it is possible that we see down the road some stuff come out of that would perhaps even the scales in that regard. Glenn Greenwald from The Guardian newspaper, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Chris.